I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a Texas state trooper for just a second.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. So imagine you're working a standard morning patrol on a highway near DeKalb, Texas. It's October 9, 2020. And you spot a vehicle driving erratically.
Like swerving around.
Yeah, speeding, swerving, literally nearly causing a collision. So standard procedure dictates you pull the driver over. But when you walk up to that window, you are immediately confronted with a scenario that, just overrides every traffic protocol in the book.
Because you're not looking at a drunk driver.
Exactly. There is a woman behind the wheel,
Mhm.
and she is extremely distressed.
Yeah.
And she is covered in blood.
Wow.
Yeah. And in her lap, she is holding a motionless infant, and she is frantically performing CPR. She
Yeah.
tells you she just gave birth on the side of the road, and the baby isn't breathing.
I mean, based on every visual cue available in those first frantic seconds, it completely looks like a tragic, desperate medical emergency.
Right. It looks like a mother fighting for her child.
Yeah.
And human nature, especially, the trained nature of first responders, dictates that you do not pause to analyze or question the premise of a mother fighting for her newborn's life on the side of a highway. You just act.
You just go into rescue mode.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
call for backup, you call for paramedics, and you try to save a life. You operate under the assumption that the physiological reality presented to you is the absolute truth.
But the reality of what happened on that highway is so much darker and far more complex than a medical emergency. What that trooper walked into wasn't a roadside birth.
Not at all.
It was the absolute catastrophic collapse of a 10-month-long, meticulously engineered deception. So today we are taking you through a rigorous, chronological forensic analysis of one of the most medically and psychologically dense crimes in modern history.
Which is the 2020 murder of Reagan Simmons-Hancock by a woman named Taylor Parker.
Yes, and before we jump in, we need to set some strict parameters for you right at the top of this deep dive.
Right, because the sources we are utilizing today consist of comprehensive criminological, forensic, and legal analyses. And because of the highly specific nature of this crime, which involves fetal abduction by maternal evisceration, we are not going to censor the sensitive medical or forensic details today.
We have to treat this case with analytical rigor. We're tracking the pathology of a lethal lie, moving step by step from the initial physiological triggers through the mechanics of the deception, all the way to the final legal verdicts in the highest courts.
It's the only way to truly understand the scope of it.
Yeah. And, normally when we talk about a lie escalating on the show, I like to use the analogy of a house of cards. But as I was reading through these forensic reports, I realized that metaphor it fails completely here.
It's way too fragile of an analogy.
Exactly. A house of cards implies fragility. It implies that one stiff breeze or, one skeptical question knocks the whole thing down. Parker's deception was not a house of cards. It was a reinforced bunker.
Propped up by a lot of systemic flaws?
Yes, shielded by systemic legal blind spots, fabricated wealth, and defended by a level of pathological manipulation that actively weaponized the medical system itself.
So to understand how a woman ends up on the side of the road with an abducted infant, we really cannot just look at the morning of the crime. We have to rewind the timeline significantly.
Right, we have to go back to the physiological and psychological triggers that occurred years earlier.
Because the escalation to capital murder in this case cannot be viewed as some isolated incident of sudden violent psychosis. If we analyze her background, we see a decade-long etiology. It's a very clear study in cause and effect.
Where does it actually start?
It begins with severe familial instability. We have access to the court testimony from her own brother, Zachary Morton, and he detailed how their parents went through a highly contentious divorce during their childhood.
Which is, sadly, not uncommon.
True, but Zachary testified that their father was remarkably neglectful, effectively placing the children on the back burner while he pursued other women and substance use.
Okay, so you look at a childhood like that, and you might expect someone to grow up wanting to provide the stability they never had, right?
You'd hope so.
But Parker didn't correct that pattern of neglect. She replicated it flawlessly. She became a mother at a very young age. She had her daughter, Emerson, at 17, and her son, Trey, at 21.
But just like her father, she consistently prioritized her romantic partners over her own children.
And the measurable turning point in her behavioral trajectory, according to multiple testimonies, actually occurred in 2014. Parker underwent gastric bypass surgery.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the mechanics of bariatric surgery, it involves surgically altering the stomach and digestive tract to force significant rapid weight loss.
But the effects are really just physical, right?
Exactly. The extreme physical transformation in Parker triggered a drastic, observable behavioral shift. She began exhibiting hypersexuality, a sudden fixation on highly revealing clothing, and she engaged in serial infidelity.
I really want to pause on that behavioral shift for a second, because her reaction to being caught in that infidelity is incredibly revealing. Her husband at the time, Tommy Wakesee, actually caught her engaging in sexual acts with another man in a vehicle.
Which obviously leads to their divorce.
Yeah, but Parker doesn't fight for her family. She completely detaches. She willingly surrenders custody of her son during the settlement and ultimately racks up over $8,500 in child support arrears.
She simply walks away from her biological children.
She had zero interest in being a mother. But then we hit 2015, which serves as this massive physiological anchor for everything that follows.
Right, the medical history here is paramount. Prior to the divorce, her second pregnancy had been complicated by preeclampsia.
Which is really dangerous.
Very dangerous. Preeclampsia is a pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure and signs of damage to another organ system, usually the liver and kidneys. Left untreated, it can be fatal to both the mother and the baby.
So because of that severe risk, Parker opted for a tubal ligation, having her fallopian tubes tied or severed to permanently prevent future pregnancies.
But the procedure failed.
It failed.
It failed. 2 years later, she suffered an ectopic pregnancy. This occurs when a fertilized egg implants and grows outside the main cavity of the uterus, almost always in a fallopian tube.
And a fallopian tube is obviously not designed to expand like a uterus.
Not at all. As the pregnancy grows, it will cause the tube to rupture, leading to massive, life-threatening internal bleeding. So she is rushed to the hospital for emergency exploratory surgery.
And while the surgeons are operating to save her life from the ruptured tube, they make a secondary catastrophic discovery. She has severe endometriosis.
Right. And for those who might not know, endometriosis is a condition where tissue similar to the lining of the inside of the uterus grows outside of it.
And in Parker's case, it was causing massive internal hemorrhaging and severe tissue damage throughout her pelvic region.
Now remember, Parker is under general anesthesia during this discovery. She is completely unconscious. The surgical team recognizes that the hemorrhaging from the endometriosis is immediately life-threatening.
So they have to make a call right then and there.
Exactly. They leave the operating room, find her husband, Wakesee, in the waiting area, and explain the situation. He authorizes a life-saving emergency hysterectomy.
Wow.
The surgeons remove her uterus, her cervix, and one of her ovaries.
So when she wakes up in recovery, she is permanently, irreversibly infertile. She will never carry a child again.
And the trial testimony detailing her reaction to waking up and learning about the hysterectomy is vital to understanding her psychology.
How did she react?
She did not express typical grief or, mourn the loss of her fertility. She became highly volatile. She expressed explosive rage, screaming at the medical staff and her husband.
Screaming about what?
Demanding to know why they didn't wake her up to make the decision herself, which, medically speaking, was impossible given she was actively hemorrhaging under anesthesia.
Wait, I need to try and wrap my head around this psychological leap. She has already demonstrated that she does not want to parent the children she currently has.
Right. She gave up custody.
Yeah, she gave up custody, doesn't pay child support, so she loses her reproductive capacity, and instead of just moving on, she suddenly turns the concept of pregnancy into her primary weapon.
It is a paradox, for sure, but a highly calculated one. The sources explicitly note how she weaponized this biological loss. She married for a second time to a man named Hunter Parker.
Okay.
And throughout that entire marriage, she spent an inordinate amount of time aggressively trying to convince friends and acquaintances to act as surrogates for her.
So by the time that second marriage dissolved in 2019, her behavioral pattern was firmly cemented.
Exactly. Pregnancy, whether it was real, pursued through surrogacy, or completely fabricated, was her core mechanism for relational control. In her mind, the promise of a child was the ultimate tether to keep a man from leaving her.
Armed with this twisted logic, she sets her sights on a new target in 2019. But she realizes that just claiming she wants a baby isn't enough to trap someone long-term.
Right. She needs more leverage.
She decides she needs to construct an entirely new, fabricated reality from the ground up. She targets a man named Wade Griffin.
And who is Wade?
He is a roofer, a welder, and a hog trapper from Dangerfield, Texas. They cross paths at a local rodeo in 2019. But Parker doesn't introduce herself as the person she actually is. A woman working an admin job at a staffing agency who previously worked at an OBGYN clinic.
She invents a grandiose, entirely fictional alternate persona.
Yeah. She tells Griffin she is an heiress to the Blackburn syrup fortune and that she is expecting an imminent payout of millions of dollars in oil and gas royalties.
And it's so important to understand the mechanics of this fraud. She doesn't just casually mention she has money. She creates the physical documentary evidence to back it up.
Right, we're talking about extreme, highly detailed financial forgery. She goes so far as to forge a physical check for $8 million.
And you have to view this from Griffin's perspective. He is a working-class tradesman. When someone hands you a document that looks official, bearing a number like $8 million, it completely short-circuits your normal skepticism.
It's just an unfathomable amount of money.
Exactly. The amount is so staggeringly large that he had no framework for how to verify it. He naively took this forged check to his local bank, attempting to cash it, completely unaware of the protocols for transferring that kind of wealth.
And she even orchestrates a fake $20 million real estate transaction. She sets up a tour of an actual 800-acre estate called Pecan Point.
Which was legitimately listed on the market, right?
Yeah, for like $4.7 million. She drafts fraudulent contracts, inserts Griffin's name onto the documents, and promises to deed him the entire estate once her inheritance clears.
And the collateral damage to Griffin is immediate and severe. Operating under the absolute belief that he is about to step into massive generational wealth, he takes on crippling personal debt.
Buying toys, basically.
Yeah, he finances a heavy-duty pickup truck, purchases a side-by-side ATV, and even buys a Nissan Altima for his mother, Connie. He is making major life decisions based on a phantom fortune.
But obviously, the millions never materialize in his bank account. Bills are coming due. So, to explain the continuous delays without admitting the fraud, Parker fabricates a subplot that feels like it was ripped straight out of a cheap thriller novel.
It really does.
She tells Griffin that her own mother, a woman named Shona Pryor, is trying to steal the inheritance.
And she escalates that lie to an extreme degree. She convinces Griffin that her mother actually attempted to hire a hitman to assassinate Parker so the mother could seize the oil royalties.
Which is insane enough on its own.
Yeah.
But she doesn't stop there.
No. She then claims that her mother was arrested by federal authorities for this murder-for-hire plot, and that her mother subsequently died by suicide while locked up in police custody.
Wait. She faked her own living mother's death just to buy more time on a fake inheritance. How does a person even begin to verify that?
Well, they don't. And that is the functional brilliance of the lie. It serves a dual purpose. First, it provides a convoluted legal excuse for why the inheritance money is tied up in probate and federal investigation.
Oh, because her mom's estate is now frozen or whatever.
Right. And second, and more importantly, it manipulates Griffin's sympathies. It paints Parker as a traumatized victim, which effectively isolates Griffin from asking too many probing questions. I mean, you don't demand a bank statement from your grieving fiancé, whose mother just supposedly tried to have her murdered.
Okay, that makes terrifying sense. That brings us to January 2020. Despite all the manipulation, Griffin's extended family, particularly his mother, Connie, is getting highly suspicious.
The math just isn't adding up for them.
Exactly. Parker senses Griffin pulling away. The financial lie is starting to fray. So knowing with absolute certainty that Griffin is ignorant of her 2015 hysterectomy, she deploys the ultimate tether. She tells him she is pregnant.
And this initiates a 10-month deception that requires a staggering amount of daily physical and psychological maintenance.
She wasn't just verbally claiming to be pregnant.
No, she purchased a silicone moon belly prosthetic online. These are highly realistic, weighted silicone molds used in film and television.
And she wore it all the time.
Constantly. The forensic timeline notes she wore this prosthetic consistently. She wore it around Griffin's family, and reportedly even during intimate moments in their shared home, to maintain the physical illusion of a growing abdomen.
Now, you might be wondering how someone successfully fakes medical documents in 2020. Well, she uses digital forgery. She purchases blank ultrasound templates online, customizes them with fake patient data and dates, and presents them to Griffin.
She even organizes a professional maternity photo shoot.
Right. Standing in a field, holding her fake belly, smiling for the camera, they throw a gender reveal party with their friends and family, announcing they are expecting a girl named Clancy Gale. They paint and outfit a nursery in Griffin's home.
The digital premeditation recovered by investigators truly underlines the cold calculation here. When law enforcement eventually analyzed her devices, they found extensive search histories.
What was she searching?
Well, she wasn't just Googling how to make a fake ultrasound look real. As the months progressed, her searches evolved. She began researching the physiological milestones of premature infants. She specifically searched for how to deliver, transport, and care for an infant at exactly 35 weeks gestation.
And this proves that she wasn't suffering from a delusion. We really need to be clear about that. She didn't experience a psychological break where she genuinely believed she was pregnant.
Right. If you believe you are carrying a child, you don't Google how to successfully fake a pregnancy.
Exactly. She was managing a project. But the most terrifying aspect of this 10-month con is how she weaponized the healthcare system itself to protect her lie.
Yes, this introduces a profound systemic vulnerability. As the fake pregnancy dragged on through the summer of 2020, Griffin's family grew increasingly aggressive with their questions.
Because they knew something was off.
But Parker used the COVID-19 pandemic as a brilliant, impenetrable shield. She cited strict, hospital-mandated pandemic protocols to prevent Griffin or anyone else from attending her supposed medical appointments. She claimed the clinics wouldn't allow guests in the waiting rooms.
Which during 2020 was entirely plausible.
Totally plausible, so nobody can physically verify her medical status. Finally, desperate for the truth, members of Griffin's family circumvent Parker entirely. They actually call Parker's former OBGYN clinic.
And the clinic manager who answers that phone call knows exactly who Taylor Parker is. The clinic's digital medical records clearly and explicitly state that Parker underwent a full hysterectomy in 2015.
So the manager knows, with absolute biological certainty, that it is impossible for this woman to be carrying a child.
You would think that's the end of it, right?
Yeah.
The manager just tells the family the truth, the con is exposed, and everyone goes home. But she can't. Her hands are completely tied by Tokyo.
The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, specifically the HIPAA Privacy Rule. This federal law strictly prohibits healthcare providers from disclosing protected health information to unauthorized third parties without explicit written consent from the patient.
And the penalties for violating this law are not minor infractions.
Not at all. The sources provide vital context here. The Office for Civil Rights enforces HIPAA aggressively. They recently levied a $1.5 million fine against corporate entities for unauthorized data disclosures. On an individual level, medical professionals have literally faced federal prison time and devastating civil lawsuits for HIPAA breaches.
Imagine you are that clinic manager. You are sitting at your desk looking at a file that proves this woman is running a massive, escalating con. You know Griffin's family is being manipulated, but you are legally constrained by the immediate threat of federal prosecution and the loss of your career.
The law doesn't care if the patient is lying to their family. The law only cares about protecting the patient's medical history.
Exactly. The clinic manager cannot legally say Taylor Parker does not have a uterus. All she can do is try to thread the needle without violating the statute.
So she gives Griffin's family a cryptic, desperate warning. She tells them over the phone, just go with your gut.
That is a terrifying catch-22. The system protects privacy so efficiently that it offers absolutely no duty-to-warn mechanism for the public.
Even when a fabricated medical condition is clearly escalating into a psychological or physical threat, the law inadvertently functions as a shield for the predator.
Which leads us directly to the breaking point. A fake pregnancy has a hard biological expiration date. You can fake an inheritance for years, blaming lawyers and probate courts.
Wait, you cannot fake a pregnancy indefinitely.
No. The biological impossibility of producing a child means Parker's financial lies and her relational lies are about to violently collide with reality. She had to produce a baby, or the entire bunker collapses.
So it's late September 2020. The original fake due date passes. So Parker tells Griffin she is scheduled for a medical induction or a C-section at Titus Regional Medical Center on October 5th.
Okay, so they're geared up for October 5th.
But the morning of October 5th arrives, and suddenly, two incredibly chaotic events occur simultaneously. First, there is a fire at Griffin's house, which he thankfully manages to extinguish with a garden hose before it destroys the property.
Then at the exact same time.
At the exact same time, the Titus Regional Medical Center receives an anonymous bomb threat that forces the entire hospital facility to evacuate its patients and staff into the parking lot.
And who does Parker blame for these highly coordinated, incredibly well-timed events? Her mother, the exact same mother she previously claimed died by suicide in federal custody.
Yeah.
Wait, she resurrects her dead mother to blame her for a hospital bomb threat?
It is pure tactical chaos manipulation. She uses the sheer confusion of the bomb threat and the arson to claim her medical care has been compromised. She tells Griffin she is forced to cancel her induction at Titus Regional and move the delivery to an entirely different state, McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Oklahoma.
And she resets her final due date to October 9th.
And the prosecutors in this case heavily theorized that Parker personally orchestrated both the arson at Griffin's home and the bomb threat at the hospital.
Because she needed those extra 4 days. She needed time to locate, stalk, and secure a victim.
Which brings us to Reagan Simmons-Hancock. We need to focus on Reagan for a moment. She was 21 years old, married to a man named Homer Hancock, and they lived in New Boston, Texas.
She was already the mother to a 3-year-old daughter named Kindly, right?
Yes. And she was currently 36 weeks pregnant with her second daughter, who they had already named Braxlyn Sage. Reagan's mother described her as having a bright Spitfire personality. She was deeply empathetic and loved fashion.
And the connection between Reagan and Parker is profoundly unsettling, precisely because of how casual and mundane it was. They were not rivals. They didn't have a history of conflict.
Not at all.
In 2019, Reagan was simply a young bride looking for a budget-friendly wedding photographer. She hired Parker based on a casual recommendation from a mutual friend. Parker photographed the wedding, delivered the photos, and politely integrated herself into the extreme periphery of Reagan's social media life.
And she just stayed there, quietly observing.
So Parker exploits this peripheral access, and when you look at the timeline, the chilling logic of why she chose Reagan becomes apparent. Reagan was exactly 36 weeks pregnant in early October 2020.
This is not a coincidence.
Now, this perfectly aligns with Parker's specific Google searches about premature deliveries and 35 to 36-week gestation care.
Because at 36 weeks, fetal lung development is usually robust enough that the infant can survive outside the womb, but it is still early enough that Parker could pass it off to Griffin as an early, unexpected emergency delivery.
She wasn't just looking for any pregnant woman. She was hunting for highly specific biological parameters that matched her fabricated timeline.
And the forensic timeline confirms that Parker actually drove by and scoped out Reagan's house the night before the murder on October 8th, confirming the layout and the target's presence.
With the target acquired and the fake due date locked in for October 9th, Parker executes a highly calculated logistical plan to isolate herself and her victim. The first step is physically removing Wade Griffin from the equation so he can't interfere or, ask to go to the hospital with her.
Right. So on the early morning of October 9th, Parker sends Griffin roughly 200 miles away to Wynwood, Oklahoma. She invents a highly lucrative, entirely fictional hog sale that she insists he needs to handle personally.
And she tells him to complete the transaction and then meet her at the hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma later that afternoon.
And there's a dark, unintended irony here for Griffin. By hooking up his trailer and transporting livestock across state lines for this phantom sale, he was inadvertently violating agricultural transport laws, completely unaware that he was being used as a pawn to clear the geographical stage for a homicide.
Wow, so Griffin is driving to Oklahoma. Homer Hancock, Reagan's husband, leaves their home in New Boston for work. It is roughly 7:30 a.m. Reagan is home alone with her 3-year-old daughter, Kindly, and Taylor Parker arrives at the front door.
Now, as we transition into the assault at the Hancock residence, we are relying strictly on the forensic reconstruction provided by crime scene technician Mark Sullivan and the medical examiner, Dr. Melinda Flores.
The physical evidence left behind indicates this was an attack of extreme, sustained, and highly personal violence. Blood spatter analysis throughout the residence showed the assault spanned multiple rooms.
Which tells us that Reagan recognized the threat immediately and fought back fiercely. She did not submit.
She fought for her life and her baby's life.
Yes. The spatter patterns indicate she remained standing for a significant portion of the attack, attempting to flee or defend herself, bleeding profusely as she moved through the house before finally collapsing on the floor.
The forensic statistics from the autopsy are just. They're staggering to comprehend. Reagan sustained 113 distinct sharp force injuries.
113.
This included 15 deep stab wounds and 98 incised wounds, which are slashing cuts. 2 separate strikes specifically perforated her jugular vein.
And it wasn't just a blade. The kinetic force used during the attack was immense. Dr. Flores documented that several of the sharp force wounds actually struck with enough power to score the underlying bone.
And in addition to the sharp force trauma, there were 39 separate blunt force injuries, heavily concentrated on Reagan's face and head. Investigators concluded these were inflicted with a hammer, resulting in a broken nose and 5 separate fractures to her skull.
The autopsy also revealed physiological evidence of manual strangulation. The sheer brutality of the layered attack is overwhelming. But there is a very specific, grim forensic detail noted by the medical examiner that underscores the precise timeline of this horror.
What was that?
Toward the end of the assault, the newly inflicted wounds stopped producing blood spatter. Reagan had suffered such a catastrophic drop in blood pressure from active exsanguination, meaning she was rapidly bleeding out, that her circulatory system essentially depressurized and collapsed while the attack was still ongoing.
Her heart simply couldn't pump blood to the new wounds.
Exactly.
Once the victim is incapacitated on the floor, Parker proceeds with the evisceration. We know the exact mechanics of this because of jailhouse confessions that Parker later made, which were introduced in court.
And the transition of weapons she used was highly calculated. She didn't just grab a knife from her pocket. She initially attempted the surgical extraction using a standard kitchen knife she found in Reagan's home.
But she quickly found the kitchen knife ineffective for the precision required to breach the uterus without destroying the fetus. So she pauses this horrific act. She walks out of the house, goes to her vehicle parked outside, and retrieves an animal veterinary kit.
Inside that kit is a professional surgical scalpel. She came to the victim's house prepared with a scalpel.
She returns inside, executes a large, crude transverse incision across Reagan's lower abdomen, physically extracts the uterus, cuts into the uterine tissue, and removes the infant Braxton Sage, along with the placenta and the umbilical cord.
I want to focus on the psychological state of the perpetrator at that exact moment in the scene, because amidst this unimaginable frenzied violence against Reagan, there is a staggering contrast.
Reagan's 3-year-old daughter, Kindly, was present in the house the entire time.
Yes. And she was left completely physically unharmed. She was later found by family members hiding silently beneath a blanket on a couch.
Parker ignored the toddler entirely.
Completely bypassed a living witness because her focus was locked purely on the biological objective of the fetal extraction.
Cell tower data confirms Parker fleeing the area between 9:09 and 9:13 a.m. Shortly after she leaves, Homer Hancock starts receiving strange text messages from his wife's phone.
Parker trying to buy time.
Yeah, but the syntax and tone don't sound like Reagan. A neighbor then contacts Homer to tell him their garage door is wide open and their puppy is running loose in the neighborhood.
Which is when family members start arriving.
Moments later, Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, arrives at the house to pick up Kindly for daycare. She finds bloody handprints smeared on the outside of the front door, walks inside, discovers the scene, and makes the frantic 911 call.
While that discovery is happening in New Boston, the forensic timeline speeds up drastically for Taylor Parker. She has successfully abducted the infant, but the biological reality of childbirth cannot be faked on the side of a highway.
Which brings us back to the scenario we opened the episode with. It is 9:36 a.m. Trooper Lee Shavers pulls Parker over in DeKalb for erratic driving. We have access to the body cam footage of this interaction.
Parker is covered in dried blood.
She is performing CPR on the motionless baby. And she has actually tucked the severed umbilical cord into her pants to visually simulate that it is still attached to her, attempting to sell the illusion of a live, unassisted birth.
But that illusion collapses almost instantly upon the arrival of paramedics. You can fool a roofer with a fake ultrasound, but you cannot fool an EMT with fake biological markers.
What did they notice first?
The first responders immediately notice severe physiological red flags. First, there is a complete absence of maternal blood or amniotic fluid on the car seats. If you have an unassisted vehicular birth, the physical evidence is undeniable.
It's a very messy process.
Exactly. There is an immense volume of fluid, usually around 800 milliliters to a liter of amniotic fluid alone at 36 weeks. The interior of Parker's vehicle was completely dry in that regard.
And furthermore, paramedic Crossland specifically noted that the amniotic fluid present on the baby's skin was already flaky and dry. Amniotic fluid takes time to evaporate and crust over.
That dry texture indicated that the child had been removed from the amniotic sac significantly earlier than the few minutes Parker was claiming she had been pulled over.
But the most damning medical anomaly occurred when the EMTs moved to clamp and cut the umbilical cord to transport the baby. They observed that the blood inside the severed cord had already separated into serum and plasma with distinct clot formation.
We really need to explain the biology of why this matters. When
Yeah.
blood is circulating inside a living body, it remains a homogeneous liquid. Once blood exits the body or circulation stops, it begins to coagulate.
Right.
Over a period of minutes to hours, depending on temperature and exposure, the heavier red and white blood cells clump together and separate from the yellowish liquid plasma and serum. For the cord blood to have separated and clotted to the degree the EMTs witnessed, it was biologically impossible for this to be a fresh birth that happened 3 minutes ago.
Despite all these glaring inconsistencies, the paramedics are professionals. They do their jobs. They initiate aggressive resuscitation protocols on the infant, and incredibly, they manage to regain a heartbeat in the back of the ambulance.
They rush both Parker and the infant to McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Oklahoma.
Upon arrival at the hospital, the medical response splits into two teams. One pediatric team is desperately working to stabilize Braxlin Sage. They place the infant on an external pacemaker, and they successfully record a sustained pulse of 58 beats per minute.
Meanwhile, the emergency room physicians are attempting to examine Taylor Parker, who is adamantly refusing to submit to a standard pelvic exam.
I mean, think about the absolute audacity of that behavior. She claims she just gave birth on the shoulder of a highway, yet she believes she could just opt out of standard medical protocols at the emergency room to keep her secret.
Her refusal to be examined physically obviously heightened the staff's suspicion, but modern medicine doesn't always require physical compliance to reveal the truth. Standard laboratory blood panels do not require her permission to analyze.
So they draw her blood anyway.
The nurses draw her blood, and the results for her human choriogonadotropin, or HCG levels, return completely negative.
And for context, HCG is a hormone produced almost exclusively by the placenta during pregnancy. If a woman has just given birth minutes prior, her HCG levels would be astronomically high.
Parker's levels were 0. She was chemically, undisputedly not pregnant.
And then the hospital staff performs a mandatory external ultrasound on her abdomen. This provides the final, undeniable anatomical proof. They see an empty pelvic cavity. She has no uterus.
The surgical reality of her 2015 hysterectomy is exposed on the monitor.
At this exact time, law enforcement back in Texas has discovered Reagan's mutilated body and realized the baby is missing. The information crosses state lines rapidly. Confronted by detectives with her lack of a uterus, the negative blood work, and the active homicide investigation in Texas, Parker's 10-month narrative completely shatters.
She formally confesses to Texas Ranger Joshua Mason. She admits she went to Reagan's house, got into a physical altercation, and used a scalpel to take the baby.
Rapid DNA testing at the hospital quickly confirms that Braxlin Sage is biologically Reagan's child. Parker is arrested immediately on the spot.
And we cannot forget the collateral devastation of Wade Griffin in this moment. He arrives at McCurtain Memorial Hospital, having driven from his fake hog sale, fully expecting to walk into a maternity ward and meet his newborn daughter, Clancy Gale.
But
Instead, he walks through the sliding doors and is immediately intercepted by law enforcement. He is detained, handcuffed, and shoved against a wall.
oh, wow.
He testified later that he was so confused he initially thought he was being arrested by federal agents for illegally transporting livestock across state lines. He had absolutely no idea about the massacre that had just unfolded in his name.
Tragically, despite the sustained 58 beats per minute pulse on the pacemaker, Braxlin Sage's tiny body cannot recover from the trauma of the extraction and the subsequent hypoxia.
She succumbs to her injuries and is pronounced dead at 1:00 p.m.
The pediatric medical examiner, Dr. Stephen Hastings, ruled the death a homicide by traumatic extraction. During the autopsy, he specifically noted bruising on the infant's scalp and severe squeezing or pulling trauma on the umbilical cord, directly resulting from the violent, unsterile evisceration.
Now, you might expect a killer who has been caught red-handed, confronted with the irrefutable evidence of a murdered mother and a deceased infant, to exhibit some form of psychological shock, breakdown, or at least, performative remorse.
You'd hope to see something human in there.
But that doesn't happen. Parker's pathology simply adapts to the architecture of her new environment. She is extradited back to Texas and booked into the Bi-State Detention Center on October 16, 2020.
And her behavior inside the jail is a masterclass in sociopathic adaptation. She essentially treats the detention center like her own personal playground. She begins modifying her standard-issue inmate uniform to make it fit more tightly and revealingly.
She utilizes the illicit jail economy to get her hands on contraband makeup so she can project an image of dominance among the other inmates.
She actually initiates romantic relationships with multiple inmates. both male and female, including Lana Addison, Travis Blocker, Adam Post, and Alan Pauly. She is caught writing emails, complaining about how she is a victim of an unjust bullshit system.
The testimony from her assigned jailhouse therapist is incredibly revealing regarding her state of mind. The therapist described Parker not as a frightened inmate, but as the manipulative top dog of the facility.
She was running the block.
She recounted a specific incident where Parker was subjected to standard disciplinary restraints. The therapist noted that Parker's eyes went completely dark, and her facial features distorted into a rage so severe and primal that the therapist realized she had to be extremely careful regarding her own safety around her.
But the most baffling and complex part of her time awaiting trial is the elaborate framing plot she orchestrates. She didn't just sit in her cell waiting for her lawyers. She actively attempted to frame Homer Hancock, the grieving husband of the woman she had just murdered.
You would think that after confessing to a Texas Ranger, she'd know the game was up.
Right. But she drafts these incredibly elaborate fake confession letters and tries to disseminate them through the jail's illicit communication networks. The letters outline a convoluted alternate reality.
What did they say?
She claims that a violent drug gang, secretly orchestrated by Homer Hancock, had drugged her, kidnapped her, driven her to the house, and physically forced her to participate in the murder using a crowbar.
To sell this narrative, she makes up these ridiculous, almost cinematic aliases for the supposed gang members, names like Kodiak, J-Dog, and Fat Boy.
It sounds like a bad movie.
It does, but here is the critical analytical point. To make the letters look authentic to whoever read them, she included highly specific, non-public crime scene details that only the actual killer would know.
Oh, like the layout of the house.
Yes, she described the exact layout of the rooms where the struggle occurred. She was actively embedding the truth into a massive, structurally sound lie to give it weight.
But she needed a delivery mechanism to get these letters out of the jail and into the hands of the press. So she approaches another inmate, a woman named Shatavia Stanley. Parker offers to pay Stanley in commissary coffee.
Which is essentially gold in a jail economy.
Exactly. She says, "I'll pay you in coffee if you pass these notes to the inmate network to get them delivered to local newspapers and the sheriff's office." Stanley reads the letters, recognizes exactly how legally radioactive this plot is, and it simply throws the notes in the trash.
The special agent who eventually intercepted the plot and testified about it noted that this wasn't just a desperate, panicked escape attempt. It was a sophisticated, highly cognitive game.
It shows she was still thinking 10 steps ahead.
It demonstrated Parker's ongoing deceptive capabilities and proved an absolute chilling lack of remorse. It also effectively destroyed any chance she had of claiming insanity because organizing a framing plot requires intense logical reasoning.
Which brings us, finally, to the trial. Late 2022, inside a Bowie County courtroom. All this forensic, medical, and behavioral evidence finally converges in front of a jury.
The defense strategy was clearly aimed entirely at mitigation. They knew they couldn't prove she didn't do it. Their entire goal was to keep her off death row.
So what was their angle?
The strategy was two-pronged. First, they introduced psychiatric mitigation. A neurologist took the stand and testified that Parker suffered from something called frontal lobe syndrome.
And to explain that medically, the frontal lobe of the brain is responsible for executive functions. Things like impulse control, emotional regulation, and understanding future consequences.
Right. The defense argued that structural brain abnormalities, rather than calculated malice, drove her inability to control violent impulses. They were legally arguing for diminished capacity, suggesting her brain was physically broken, and therefore she couldn't form the specific intent required for capital murder.
But the core legal battle, the argument that literally determined life or death in this courtroom, was the viability argument regarding the infant. The defense challenged the capital kidnapping charge itself.
This requires a deep dive into Texas law.
Right. Under Texas Penal Code, Section 19.03A2, to secure a capital murder conviction, the state must prove that the murder occurred during the commission of another qualifying felony. In Parker's case, the qualifying felony was the kidnapping of Braxton Sage.
But the statute has a very strict legal definition. The Penal Code defines the victim of a kidnapping as a person. And under Texas law at the time, for a fetus to be legally recognized as a person, it must be born and alive.
The defense built their entire case around this definition. They argued that because of the extreme trauma of the unsterile surgical extraction and because the baby wasn't spontaneously breathing or crying when the trooper pulled her over, Braxton Sage was functionally stillborn.
Think about the legal ramifications of that, meaning legally, you cannot kidnap a deceased fetus. If the defense successfully convinces the jury that the baby died in the womb during the assault, the kidnapping charge vanishes.
And without the kidnapping charge, the capital murder charge drops down to first-degree murder, and the death penalty is permanently off the table. The maximum penalty she could face would be life in prison.
This is where Assistant District Attorney Kelly Crisp systematically dismantles the defense's strategy using medical science. She calls the EMTs and the pediatric specialists to the stand to defeat the viability argument.
What was the key testimony?
Dr. William Herron testified to the mechanisms of cellular hypoxia. He explained that if the infant had truly been dead since the extraction at 9:10 a.m., irreversible cellular death and tissue hypoxia would have set in rapidly.
So resuscitation wouldn't have worked.
Exactly. Medical resuscitation at 9:45 a.m. in the ambulance would have been physiologically impossible. The fact that the medical team achieved a sustained 58 beats per minute pulse on the pacemaker definitively proved that the infant was legally, biologically born alive and survived for hours afterward.
And the prosecution also introduced a piece of evidence that destroys Parker's own defense, using her own words. They brought in a jailhouse confession. Inmate Shawnee Yeager testified that Parker admitted to her exactly what she did right after the extraction.
What did she say?
Parker told her that she placed the newly extracted baby against Reagan's cheek and told the baby to tell Mama bye.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The prosecution points out the obvious psychological flaw in the defense's argument.
Yeah.
You do not speak to or give instructions to a stillborn, lifeless infant. Parker's own actions prove she believed the baby was alive at the moment of abduction.
And to rebut the frontal lobe syndrome defense, the state brought in their own psychological experts who diagnosed Parker with extreme psychopathy and borderline personality disorder. But they didn't just rely on diagnoses.
They used the data.
They used her 10-month digital footprint as undeniable proof of cognitive control. The Google searches on how to fake an ultrasound, the coordination of the bomb threat, the deliberate geographical isolation of Wade Griffin. The experts explain that impulsivity looks like a bar fight.
A sudden snap.
Right. A 10-month, step-by-step logistical operation proves cold-blooded, highly regulated premeditation. It completely negated the theory of an impulsive neurological lapse.
The evidence was just overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a verdict of guilty, and during the penalty phase, they recommended death. Judge John Tidwell sentenced Taylor Parker to death by lethal injection, making her the first woman in the state of Texas to be sentenced to death in 12 years.
But as with any capital case, the legal maneuvering did not stop at the gavel.
No, the mandatory appellate process immediately kicked in. In 2025, Parker's appellate counsel, Caitlin Halpern, filed a high-profile appeal that gained significant media attention. It is often referred to in legal circles as the fat-shaming appeal.
What was the basis of that?
The defense argued that during the trial, the state improperly introduced evidence of Parker's 2014 gastric bypass surgery and her subsequent hypersexuality and infidelity. The appellate lawyers claimed this evidence was highly prejudicial and irrelevant to the murder, designed solely to fat-shame her, paint her as a sexual deviant, and turn the jury's morals against her.
But the state fought back, arguing that the surgery wasn't introduced to shame her. It was introduced to establish the structural foundation of her motive.
How does that connect to the murder?
The extreme weight loss and the ensuing promiscuity established a documented timeline of her deep-seated fear of abandonment and her growing obsession with male validation. That psychological fear is exactly what drove the 10-month fake pregnancy. She was desperate, pathologically so, to keep Wade Griffin from leaving her when he started asking questions.
And the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed with the state's logic. They ruled the evidence was probative, not prejudicial, and rejected the appeal entirely.
We also saw complex civil litigation stem from the fallout of this tragedy. Homer Hancock filed a civil lawsuit against Wade Griffin for negligent entrustment.
Explain negligent entrustment for us.
The legal theory of negligent entrustment argues that you have a legal duty not to entrust a dangerous instrument, like a vehicle, to someone you know or should reasonably know is unfit or dangerous.
Oh, because she used his truck.
Right. The lawsuit argued that Griffin ignored massive flashing red flags regarding Parker's pathological lying and general incompetence, yet he still allowed her to use a vehicle registered in his name. That vehicle was the exact instrument she used to travel to Reagan's house, commit the murder, and attempt her escape.
It was an attempt by the family to hold him civilly accountable for failing to recognize the extreme danger living in his own house.
And culturally, the sheer bizarre cruelty of this case left a massive footprint. Netflix released a documentary covering the case called Maternal Instinct that quickly racked up 25.5 million views.
But what I found really ethically and narratively interesting was that the director, Jessica Dimmock, purposefully and publicly denied Taylor Parker an interview for the film.
Why does she do that?
Dimmock stated that giving Parker a massive global platform to spin more lies or frame more innocent people would be a profound disrespect to Reagan and Braxton, especially since Parker has never demonstrated the single shred of genuine remorse.
Instead of focusing on the killer's voice, the documentary focused on the vulnerabilities of isolated rural communities. It explored how towns where implicit trust is a baseline assumption are uniquely susceptible to manipulation, and how easily a manipulative psychopath can exploit that community trust to build their bunker of lies.
So we have walked you through a staggering, exhausting journey today. We started with a fake real estate contract over syrup fortune, and we ended on death row in Texas. And as you listen to this, you have to realize that we all live in a society built entirely on a baseline level of implicit trust.
We really do.
We assume that when a friend hands us an ultrasound printed out on glossy paper, it's real. We assume a grieving daughter telling us her mother died in federal custody is telling the truth. We assume our massive, heavily regulated medical systems, with all their strict privacy laws, are ultimately designed to protect the innocent.
And that leads to an incredibly provocative concept that I want you to mull over as we conclude this analysis. How much of your daily reality, your safety, and your financial security relies entirely on the unwritten assumption that the people you invite into your life are fundamentally tethered to the truth?
It's terrifying to think about.
It is. And what are we supposed to do as a society when the very legal systems designed to protect our privacy like HIPAA end up becoming the impenetrable shields that predators use to hide their monsters in plain sight?
It certainly makes you look at that hypothetical traffic stop in a completely different light. When the societal X-ray machine is broken, when the diagnostic muddy waters are expertly manipulated by a predator, the facade of a medical emergency might just be a monster hiding behind the steering wheel, counting on you to help them. Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive.